Suffice it to say, I have a mixed relationship with the Logitech G Cloud. Whenever picking out a handheld, you've got to go with something that's got a decent screen. Power is important, but I always find power is useless if the screen is subpar. The first time I booted up my Logitech G Cloud, I was instantly in love with the screen. It's got a solid mix of brightness and colour saturation, and everything I threw at it looks stunning. I'm also a big fan of how the rounded grips feel in my hand. The thicker ends fit snugly into my palms, which isn't something I can say for a lot of handhelds, you know the ones. Those sticks as well, they're slightly concave so they're easier to use in first person shooters. If you've ever used a Nintendo Switch, you're probably well aware of just how awful rounded convex sticks are. So, where's the problem? $349.99 for a device that can't manage to play anything above PS2 games is a lot. I tried my usual crop of emulators and the G Cloud really caps out at GameCube, and even then it's not perfect. PS2 will mostly work, which is a good sign I suppose. But that screen though, there's also the lack of a fan. Every device I play on normally has a fan, to keep everything cool. And some even have fan controls built in when I'm playing the more high-end titles. But Logitech decided the G Cloud does not need a fan, and that severely limits what it's capable of. Put this in perspective, the Steam Deck costs $50 more than the G Cloud and not only has a fan, but can play up to Switch games. So yeah, I do like my Logitech G Cloud for playing PS2 games, but there are other consoles I prefer to use over it. The Pimax Portal is a device I didn't expect to love as much as I did. When I first took it out the box, it's obvious it's based on the Nintendo Switch. Hell, it's even got detachable controllers, which is still fairly unique in the Android world. But the more I played on it, the more these decisions started to make sense. The controller's detached so you can prop it up against something on a desk or hook it up to a TV or monitor. I find a stack of game boxes works pretty well. It's a shame it doesn't have a kickstand like the Switch does, but that's fine. Rather than going down the Nintendo route of a Joy-Con rail you slot the controllers into, the Pimax Portal instead just uses some really freaking strong magnets. I can't undersell just how strong these magnets are either. When I was trying to take photos of the device for my review, anytime the controllers were near the console, they'd slide across my desk and reinsert themselves. That is some serious power. This may not sound like much to some, but the Pimax Portal really does improve on what Nintendo made with the Switch. It's the little touches like the magnets that help it feel more like a modern product. That, and I don't need to worry about my kids snapping the Joy-Con rails off anymore. Anyone with kids will know exactly what I'm talking about. The screen in the Pimax Portal is super crisp, but the colour gamut looks slightly better on the AYANEO Pocket Air. It's only a minor difference, and I could only tell when I had both consoles side by side, but it is there. As for power, every PS2 game I loaded on the Pimax Portal worked without any problems. I used Aether SX2 and I was able to up the resolution to 1080p without any major drawbacks whatsoever. In a direct comparison, there isn't much between the Pimax Portal and the AYANEO Pocket Air in terms of quality, and the custom versions of Android actually handle quite similarly. I did find the Pimax Portal crashes more than the Pocket Air though, that's the only downside. Going a bit more granular, I prefer the Pimax operating system overall as the fixed backgrounds helps to avoid eye strain, just a little bit. Although it is an older version of Android that's being used here. Getting back to power for a second, there really isn't much in it. Switch games run about the same frames per second on both consoles, which is the real test of what a device is capable of in my mind. What I will say is the choice here is between a recognisable device in the AYANEO Pocket Air or a more Switch-like device in the Pimax Portal. I love both of them, but they're two handhelds for two completely different wants. If you game on the Switch a lot, go with the Pimax Portal. It's more familiar and you'll be more accustomed to it. If, however, you're used to PlayStation handhelds, then the AYANEO Pocket Air is the better choice out of the two. The Steam Deck is the current king of handhelds. Its compatibility with every retro console and a reasonable buy-in price make it one of the best PS2 handheld emulator consoles available. I also use it as my day-to-day work PC, it's that powerful. It is, however, freaking huge, and that's something I don't think I'll ever get over. The 7-inch screen is absolutely stunning, and being able to upscale the resolution of older systems means retro games look better on the Steam Deck than they did on the original PS2 hardware. But every time I pick up a Steam Deck, I'm reminded of how cumbersome it is. Don't get me wrong, it's an amazing system that packs in everything from comfortable concave thumbsticks to mouse pads, but the weight isn't for everyone, especially those with accessibility issues. Tell you what though, the mouse pads, or touchpads as they're actually called, deserves some serious recognition. When I'm playing on a handheld device, I'm obviously not going to have a mouse nearby, for the most part anyway. So having the touchpad makes moving the mouse cursor around so much easier than using a stick to point and click like it is on the ASUS ROG Ally. As a retro gaming device though, the sheer power inside the Steam Deck is what makes it such a strong contender. I set up EmuDeck in about 10 minutes and was in game playing PS2 titles around 5 minutes after that. That's pretty fast, isn't it? The big issue is just how much of a pain Linux is at times, the Linux operating system. The Steam Deck uses two operating systems. The first is SteamOS, the main gaming operating system when you boot it up, and everyone I've spoken to, and myself included, find it intuitive and it's very similar to a home console experience. But if you're going to play retro games, you're going to have to load up the second operating system, Linux. And every time I do that, I know I'm in for a bad time. If you've read any of my articles on Retro Resolve before, you'll know how often I write guides to help people. Especially when it's something complex, because my job is to explain something in a more simplistic manner. What you don't see is how long it takes me to get anything done in the Linux desktop environment. Even though I've been using Windows for over half my life, I was lost the very first time I used Linux. Everything is always multiple clicks away or hidden under an obtuse menu, or it feels like that most of the time. That's why I always suggest using EmuDeck to set up the PS2 emulator. It takes all the guesswork out of the equation. Just keep in mind you will need to learn the basics of Linux for other similar types of tasks. In the year and a half I've owned a Steam Deck, I have managed to get on top of Linux in the end, but if you expect to be able to use it just because you understand Windows, you're in for a reality check. The AYANEO Pocket Air is my go-to Android device because of how much it gets right. We all know how important controls are, especially if you're going to be playing on a device for a long period of time. And despite this, I still keep seeing the same problems in general handhelds. Tiny triggers, non-Hall effect sticks, too many buttons, not enough feedback, the same problems keep cropping up again and again. Bad controls make bad consoles, it's as simple as that. That's why I was legit shocked to find that AYANEO Pocket Air avoided most of the current pitfalls. Take the triggers for example. On the Pocket Air, the triggers are not only extra large, they're also curved upwards so your index finger has a place to rest. I cannot stress just how much more comfortable triggers like these are. My fingers never felt like they were treading for air or looking for a place to hang out. I can rest them and they stay ready comfortably. As for the sticks, both sticks and triggers use Hall sensing tech, which means unlike other consoles on this list, the chances of suffering stick drift are near zero. If that's not enough, the bumpers are placed slightly lower than the triggers, so my index finger can slide from one button to the other easily. It's a small feature, but this is the kind of stuff I love. As much as I love the Steam Deck and ASUS ROG Ally, there's no beating the AYANEO Pocket Air when it comes to the trigger setup. I do feel like because of the smaller size of the device, it's only got a 5.5 inch screen after all, my middle two fingers and little fingers were floating on the back of the console. But that's not a problem specific to the AYANEO Pocket Air. I've seen it elsewhere and there isn't really a good solution for smaller devices. In terms of power, the AYANEO Pocket Air uses the MediaTek Dimensity 1200 processor. What that means in simpler terms is the Pocket Air is more powerful than the G Cloud and on a similar footing to the Pimax Portal. What does that look like in action? PS2 works brilliantly. I was able to get several games up and running at 1080p resolution with the upscaling tech and they looked super crisp. I did have a confusing problem with one game though. God of War for some reason really struggled to work on the AYANEO Pocket Air. Normally this would indicate the handheld isn't powerful enough to run it, but I'm also able to get some Nintendo Switch games running at 60 frames per second on the device, so that isn't the problem here. It's also not the emulator or my game and the BIOS dump, because they both work fine on my other Android devices. Strange, I know, but if you're looking to play God of War, you'll need to drop the resolution down in the settings menu to get it running a little smoother. Something else I love about the AYANEO Pocket Air, the custom version of Android is easy to use and is responsive, and the D-pad is one of the best I've ever used. It's a no-nonsense D-pad that's slightly curved and bounces well. I was able to perform quarter and 360 inputs easily with this D-pad, which isn't something I can say for handhelds like the Anbernic RG350 or TrimUI Smart. Lastly, in the top spot, we have the ASUS ROG Ally. Now, I know, it's had a myriad of problems, but it's still a really good console. Here's why. What's the base reason any of us buy a new console? Why upgrade from, say, a PS4 to PS5? The answer, as simple as it is power. That's what the ASUS ROG Ally hooked me with. This beast of a machine is more powerful than anything on this list, and that is instantly noticeable from the moment you boot it up. Let me give you an example. When I tried to play Switch games on my Steam Deck, some worked without any issues, but a lot simply didn't. When I loaded the same games up on the ASUS ROG Ally, a lot of what didn't work on the Steam Deck worked brilliantly. That's not to say you'll have 100% coverage by any means, but the difference in power in play here definitely is a factor. I'm going to get this out the way early. I'm someone who grew up with Windows, so when I first turned the ASUS ROG Ally on, I knew how to use it straight away. Sure, there is some adjustment to getting used to a Windows 11 operating system in handheld form, but if you've used a Windows PC before, chances are you'll feel at home like I did. I've said before how big of a consideration screen quality is when it comes to picking a handheld console, and it bears repeating. If you want PS2 games to look as good as they possibly can, you want a screen that's capable of HD and has a great colour gamut. Colour gamut, for those unaware, is essentially how well colours look as they're intended to be. Is the blue the proper shade of blue, or is it kind of a greeny shade, etc. The ASUS ROG Ally packs in 1080p at 120Hz. I didn't find many PS2 games that could make use of that 120Hz refresh rate, but changing the settings in the PCSX2 emulator to output PS2 games at 1080p really improves the visuals. They don't look old anymore thanks to that excellent upscaling tech. I found the rounded corners of the console to be comfortable as well, but not as comfortable as the Steam Deck. I also appreciate that the triggers are curved, but they could be a touch bigger. They're also not as slanted as, say, the AYANEO Pocket Air, meaning I have to lift my finger over the bumpers rather than slide directly onto them. What it all comes down to with the ROG Ally is how much power you need. The power in the Ally is only limited by the state of emulation. Some Switch games work, but those that aren't compatible yet won't. Simple as that. And that's down to the emulator itself rather than the actual console. Do you need that kind of power? Do you want to play Zelda Breath of the Wild at 45 to 60 frames per second? Or would you rather save some money and go with an Android device? That's the question I'd ask myself if I was you. The ROG Ally is the most expensive handheld on this list at $699, but that extra power was always going to cost more. It's pricey, but it's on par with AYANEO handhelds and the Lenovo Legion Go. But I'd be remiss if I didn't tell you about some of the problems I've seen firsthand. The big one is the SD card reader suddenly stops working. The problem isn't specific to me either. ASUS has confirmed there's a problem, but there currently isn't a fix even months on. Some users also reported problems with the dead zone of the sticks being too small. I've not suffered that problem myself, and in ASUS's defense they have released a fix in the form of a software update. But it's still something to consider when you're spending this kind of money. Despite that, not having an SD reader hasn't hindered my enjoyment at all. I got around the problem by upgrading the 512GB SSD to a 1TB SSD, and the process is really simple thanks to how the internals of the Ally has been designed. Alternatively, you could grab a dock and slam a different SD card into that. You shouldn't have to do this kind of workaround, but it's a problem that can be solved in the meantime. Neither of those are ideal fixes, obviously, but my point is I've been living without an SD card reader and I still love my ASUS ROG Ally. Its screen, power and ease of use simply cannot be beaten. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to give me a thumbs up, and if you'd like to see more from Retro Resolve, please consider subscribing. Until next time, see ya.